This is Press Pass, your all-access pass to an extra Meet the Press conversation.
President Ronald Reagan fashioned himself as a citizen politician, a strategy which bolstered his appeal with many conservatives and solidified his legacy. Joining me now to talk about the mark that Reagan made on American politics and is still making on American politics today is Reagan biographer Craig Shirley. He's author of a new book on Reagan called Last Act, The Final Years and Emerging Legacy of Ronald Reagan. Craig, welcome back to Press Pass. So the last act of Reagan, number one, is this it? When you're trying to, what are you trying to set out to do with this book that's been different with Rendezvous with Destiny and some of the other Reagan books that you've done?
Well, it's interesting, is that when I was working on my second book, which was on the 1980 campaign, my 9-year-old son, Mitchell, was highlighting all through news clips. Every time the word Reagan was mentioned, he was highlighting. He looks up one evening as I'm working and he's highlighting. He says, "Dad, has anybody ever done a book about Reagan after he was president?" And I thought for a moment. I said, "No." And that was the birth of Last Act, because nobody had ever done, the shorthand is that he went back to California, announced he had Alzheimer's and passed away. But as a matter of fact, there was a lot of living that went on in those 11, 12 years.
What's interesting here is I feel like you could have called the book Chasing Reagan. And I mean it by this. I feel like the Democrats from 1964 till 1992 were always chasing Kennedy.
Yes.
Chasing the Kennedy legacy. Desperate
Gary
to...
Hart with the...
That's right.
Yeah, right.
And even Clinton himself, right? What was the most important moment at that Democratic convention? The fact that the two men had shaken hands. The Republican Party today is still chasing Reagan.
Absolutely.
And, they need that moment to when they have caught him and then maybe taken that next step. The Democratic Party has moved on from Kennedy.
Yes.
In ways that they kind of needed to move on. This is still a party chasing Reagan.
Yes.
Nothing wrong with that, but they are.
No, I think he himself would say is that my legacy has always been about the future, not about the past. I think he'd be proud of what he did, and he said so in his farewell remarks. But nobody calls himself a Bush Republican or a Nixon Republican. They all call themselves a Reagan Republican, and that's a great tribute to him. But I agree is that the party needs to be about the future, not about the past. They can take the best of Reagan, but also project into the 21st century instead of just hearkening back to the 20th century.
All right, let's get into the book here. So, because it's funny to hear Reagan, because as we're talking about the end of Obama's presidency, being compared to Reagan is important to Barack Obama.
Yes.
And I find that fascinating. And he, look, to his credit, he said it before he ran for president.
Right.
That Reagan was transformational. And the biggest thing is that he mainstreamed conservatism. Right. Isn't that is that his biggest legacy?
Well, I would say that there are a lot of things that are his biggest legacy. The defeat
politically, I would say.
Politically, he changed the Republican Party. He completely changes it from a party that is static to a party that's dynamic, from a party that is basically about the status quo to a party that's anti-status quo. The great secret of Ronald Reagan was he was always a revolutionary. He always challenged conventional wisdom, and he changes the Republican Party into a party that is, it doesn't accept the Berlin Wall. It can be torn down. Doesn't accept that the Soviet Union will last forever. It can be defeated. Doesn't accept that government has to be static. Government can be dynamic and send power and authority back to the individual and back to the citizenry, back to the states. So that he always challenged conventional wisdom. I mean, Bush changed that, but I think the party's going now back toward Reagan's revolutionary beliefs.
What's interesting about what you described, there's plenty of definitions of small c conservatism that doesn't mean.
Yes.
Because there is one definition of conservatism that is slowing down
downward
and slowing down change.
Right.
Ronald Reagan was not about slowing change down.
No, he was on the contrary.
So what does that mean? It's a new definition of conservatism, and it doesn't fit the old definition.
I would say that Reaganism in and of itself is a particular strain of American conservatism. And I say American conservatism very deliberately because it's different from European conservatism. European conservative defends the status quo. European conservative believes that power flows down to the citizenry instead of up. Reagan is informed and imbued with the American Revolution, which takes its power and puts it in the citizenry and against, first the British monarchy and then against centralized authority. So he actually is a throwback to the future, so to speak, because the American Revolution is what really motivates him.
He is
Benjamin.
So he really
Rush.
is an old school Federalist.
Well, Benjamin Rush said at the end of the revolution, he wrote a letter to Thomas Paine, and he said, the war is over, but the revolution continues.
Right.
There's always a fight for individual rights and freedom, and so Reagan enlists in that fight. He understands finally what it's all about. It's always about power. Where is power going to be? Is it going to be here or is it going to be here? You know, the time in high school physics that I didn't fall asleep, I remember the teacher saying, power can neither be destroyed nor created. It can only be moved around.
Right.
And with the New Deal forward, power was moving away from the citizenry toward the national government. Reagan runs in 1980 and wins in 1980 on a platform of returning power back to the citizenry, away from the national government.
You say that most people think Ronald Reagan went to California, retired, and just sort of dealt with his Alzheimer's,
right?
But that there was some active years.
Oh, it was
what
very
were they?
active.
Tell me about him.
He gave major speeches. He met 5 more times with Mikhail Gorbachev. He met with Thatcher. He went to the Houston Convention in 1992 and gave what many believe is the finest speech of his life.
Yeah.
He talks, about the future, and he talks about himself in more personal means than he had before.
When did he stop going to his office? I want to say it was somewhere around 2000.
It was
99,
yeah,
something
right, yes.
Because I feel like
no, it was later than that.
Because I feel like that 2000 presidential campaign, McCain would make an appearance, Bush would go, that there was a lot of these travels.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it was about 1999, 2000, and it's in the book,
right,
when he stops going to the office. But it's about then. It's about 4 or 5 years before he passes away.
So the Reagan legacy is being treated well by historians.
Yes.
Not just yourself, but others.
Yes.
Which, of course, for people that lived during the Reagan years, you would say, oh boy, it took them a while. But this is, when presidents say, well, history will be kinder to me than I was in the moment, you chalk it up
Millard
to
Fillmore is still waiting for his
That's true.
revival.
You chalk it up to a liberal media at the time. But how much of it is just in the time, nobody ever sees historical moments?
I think that's most of it.
Yeah.
I think that the people are so myopic, is that James McGregor Burns, who is arguably a liberal but a very good historian, said he would rate Reagan in the great or near great category. John Patrick Diggins, another kind of the official historian for the American left, his last book was Ronald Reagan, Fate, Freedom, and the Making of History. And this liberal historian comes to the conclusion that Reagan is one of our 4 greatest presidents, alongside Washington, Lincoln, and Franklin Roosevelt, because he freed or saved many, many people.
To me, what political legacy of Reagan is that it was so powerful. A political legacy is transformational.
Yes.
I think, is when you make the other party have to change. And no moment to me was starker than when Bill Clinton had to go before State of the Union and say the era of big government is over. This is not changing the Republican Party. This is changing the Democratic Party.
Exactly.
And that's how you transform. And with Barack Obama, maybe in 10 years, will we find out whether, if you're truly transformational, when you make the other party have to pivot? Is that a fair judgment politically?
There is a dialectic to American political history. Every generation or two, there is a radical change in the presidential election, and we go off like a cue ball hitting an 8-ball off in a radically different election. 1800, Jefferson says that he regards his election as the second American Revolution. Then you go to Andrew Jackson's election, then Abraham Lincoln, Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, Ronald Reagan, and Obama falls within that theory. The question is is he truly a revolutionary president in that he moves power away from the citizenry back to the government in order to do good things? He believes, but is he simply a detour in history? I don't think we don't know. We don't know yet.
That I think it's like, and it was it was at the time when he was trying to compare Clinton to Reagan.
Yes.
And of course at the moment that offended Clinton. Let's go back to this Republican field, and I go this idea of chasing Reagan. Is this field being too angry, being too negative? Because one thing Ronald Reagan wasn't was negative.
No, Reagan got angry. I remember in 1976 when he was campaigning against the Panama Canal Treaties, and he was taking on Gerald Ford, and he would thunder, "We built it, we paid for it, it's ours, and we're going to keep it." Reagan was often angry. Now, he changed, he mellowed somewhat. But you look at his speech for Goldwater in 1964, there's lots of flashes of anger. He's angry at the Great Society, he's angry at the New Deal, he's angry at student protesters. So he often got angry.
Is it just that stylistically he didn't come across that way? There's
I
like
think
a
that
personal
our
style.
recollection now of Reagan is more presidential than pre-presidential.
We don't think about the 76 and 64
Exactly,
Reagan.
exactly. We think about President Ronald Reagan as opposed to Governor Ronald Reagan or private citizen Ronald Reagan.
And you do indicate something that I think people forget is that he was a populist at heart.
Oh, very much so.
And that's we're seeing populism percolate, but that was why he kept the coalition together.
Well, as Madison wrote in the Federalist Papers, he said he wrote about a delicate balance. He said we must set ambition against ambition, and by that is that you can't tilt power too much toward corporations or toward big Washington or toward any type of concentration of power is ultimately a threat to individual rights. When he ran in 1976, he does a press conference at the National Press Club in November of 1975, and he inveighs against big business, big labor, big lobbyists. It was pure American populism.